Hey everyone, and welcome to Exceptional Children in the Music Classroom. I'm Casey Hall, a Fine Arts Education Program Specialist at the Georgia Department of Education, and I'm here today to help facilitate an important discussion for all music educators across the state of Georgia. If you're watching this webinar, you're more than likely seeking out some information, resources, and strategies to help support students with special needs in your own music classroom. There's a lot of information that we're going to cover today, so let's get started. Here's a brief overview of this webinar. First, we'll discuss the main purpose and potential reasons that may have brought you to want to learn more about teaching students with special needs in your music classrooms. Then I'll introduce our featured guest and her expertise in working with students with special needs both inside and outside of the classroom. Afterwards, our featured guest will guide you in understanding the 8 most common disabilities within schools and provide you with clear definitions, common characteristics, general learning styles and needs, and suggested teaching strategies for success in the music classroom for each disability. Due to the wealth of information and expertise our featured guest will be providing us, this webinar will be split into 4 parts so that each disability can be discussed in detail. For part 1, our featured guest will be discussing information about the Autism Spectrum Disorder and Intellectual Disabilities. For part 2, our featured guest will be discussing information about significant developmental delay and emotional behavioral disorder. For part 3, our featured guest will be discussing information on other health impairments and orthopedic impairments. And for part 4, we will be discussing information about the hearing impaired and visually impaired. Lastly, we'll discuss several resources that you can research on your own if you choose to do so, as well as provide you with our contact information if you would like to continue further discussions on this topic. Whether you are prepared or not, you will encounter a variety of students with special needs in your music classroom at some point in your teaching career. So, what brought you here today? You may feel lost, unprepared, and struggle to adequately reach and teach the students with special needs that attend your music classroom based on their various needs and required supports. You may have been required to take one class regarding students with special needs years ago as a part of your general education course in college, and you maybe need a crash course as a refresher. You may not have knowledge or any experience in teaching students with special needs, or you may be looking for information, solutions, and successful strategies to help reach students with special needs, specifically in the music classroom. These are just some of the potential reasons out of the various reasons that may have brought you here to be watching this webinar. However, regardless of your personal circumstances that did bring you here today, we must understand that each of our students in our classrooms, including those who have special needs, are unique. This includes their individual learning needs and educational supports that may be required of you as their music teacher. So the main purpose of this webinar is to provide you with a general overview of the 8 most common disabilities in a classroom setting, as well as their definitions, characteristics, learning styles or needs, and tips for potential success in your music classroom, both for you and your students. Before we continue, I am proud and deeply honored to introduce to you not only a good friend and colleague of mine, but truly an inspirational educator in the field of music education and music therapy. Our featured guest for this 4-part webinar series is Amber Weldon Stevens. She currently is the Department Chair and Internship Director for the Music Therapy Department with the Fulton County School System in Atlanta, Georgia. She started the program 31 years ago, and it is now one of the largest school system music therapy programs in the United States. Amber holds a bachelor's degree in music therapy from the University of Georgia, a master's degree in multiple and sensory disabilities from Georgia State University, and a specialist degree in special education administration from the University of West Georgia. In 2000, Amber was selected as the Fulton County Schools Teacher of the Year. Amber is currently the immediate past president of the American Music Therapy Association and has served as the past president of the Music Therapy Association of Georgia, president of the Southeast region of the American Music Therapy Association, president-elect and vice president of the American Music Therapy Association, president of the University of Georgia Redcoat Band Alumni Association, and president of the Kell High School Band Boosters Association. Amber currently teaches part-time at Kennesaw State University and with drum majors in the summers at the University of Georgia. Thank you, Amber, for joining us and sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise on this topic. You are currently watching part one of this webinar series in which our featured guest, Amber Weldon Stevens, will be discussing the Autism Spectrum Disorder and Intellectual Disabilities.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amber Weldon Stevens. I think I had just recently got introduced, but it's so nice to be with you guys over the next almost 4 hours or 4 parts as I go through different disabilities. I just want you to know that as a music therapist for over 30 years, it's hard to say that number, I love what I do, and I love getting to work with students with disabilities. I have been passionate about this work for so long, and I'm honored that the State Department asked me to do this for you. I really want to work harder in the state to make sure that more students with disabilities are really served in the ways that would be best for them. And I think so much of that makes it easier for music educators is understanding more about the kiddos. In my world, I chose, after I got a couple of degrees in music early on, I did music therapy and music education. And then I realized in my graduate work, I needed to know more about the children. I was working only with special ed. And the more I learned and the more I knew about the disabilities, the more I could be better at what I did and how I could use music more effectively. And so this webinar, these 4 parts, are just to really explain about the disabilities and to really learn a little bit about their characteristics and their learning styles and things that will be helpful to music. I'm going to show you some things that I have at my desk and down beside me as I go along, so that these things, little tricks of the trade that I hope might help you. They, again, working in special education for all these years, there are days when I drive home and think, oh, wow, what did I do for them? Was what I did therapeutic? Did they learn the things I wanted them to learn? And then other days I feel so incredibly rewarded. It is one of the most rewarding fields. I can't fathom doing anything but what I do. I love what I do. I work part-time at Kennesaw State University, and I teach the class for all the music ed majors. And so all music ed majors get this class. And that's kind of what this webinar is for me as I was putting it together. It's really just a quick spattering of what those kids take in a semester, because as a music educator, you are considered highly qualified to work with all students, preschool through 12th grade, with disabilities, as long as you've had that one class in special education. But we all know the one class isn't enough. And like I just said, even myself, I have 2 graduate degrees in special education, and there are days I go, I don't know that that's enough. So I'll do my best to help you through this. I know that hopefully you'll have my contact information after this is all over. And so you can contact me and let me know, have any questions, let me help you through some difficult situations, ask me content, ask me about students, and I'll do what I can to help you design a really, some successes for the kids. So this first part 1, we're going to do 4 parts, but part 1, we're going to do what I call 2 of the 2 heavy hitters. And the 2 heavy hitters, meaning they are the students probably with some of the higher incidents that you have in your classrooms. And they're the ones that maybe bring on your most frustrations because you're just not sure how to teach them effectively. So this webinar is set up in parts. We're going to literally do 2 disabilities in the 4 parts each. So there'll be 8 disability areas that we'll cover over the next several hours together. There'll be breaks that I hope you could click on and watch some and learn, and you'll see which of the different disabilities we're going to hit, so you'll know which ones to go look at. The first 2, up until we get to the last seminar, the last webinar will be more about those that are low incidence, but when you have them in your classrooms, you've really got to think about how you're going to work with those kids effectively. I was going to talk a little bit about the 2 big bodies of law. I am going to back up and talk about it because I want to make sure you understand it. As a music educator, you may or may not had a lot of this information, or you had it and it was a long time ago. But so you know that there are 2 large bodies of law. There's lots of laws that govern the needs of special ed kids. But the 2 large bodies that I make sure my kids in at Kennesaw State know is that the 504 plan and an IEP. So the 504 was a law that was passed back in 1973, and that was to protect individuals. It's kind of their medical needs, kids with asthma, kids with cancer, things when kids needed some specific modifications and supports put into place for a period of time. Now, that period of time could be ongoing for years or could just be a matter of weeks of what the kid needed. So interesting that body of law, the 504 plan, came about before the Individuals Disability Education Act, Public Law 94-142, which came out in 75. So in my lifetime, because I'm older. In my lifetime, it's crazy that there were no bodies of law early on, and then there became bodies of law that protected our kids. And so IDEA has 13 disability categories. And the reason why I chose the 8 that we chose that we're going to talk about is that these are the 8 that have the higher incidence in your classrooms. And these are the ones that I think I can give you some tips and some education on them that will help you better educate the kiddos. So as a music educator, you need to know that there are laws governing the 504 and there are laws governing the IEP, which is a product from IDEA. So the IEP and 504. So there's documents that come to your table, that come to your desk as your first year teacher or 20 years in. And you get these and their modifications and adaptations and things that you need to do as a teacher of this child to tell you more about the kid, and you usually sign the documents and give it back. Always remembering that these are that this is a binding law agreement that you are going to do what this document says to better support the kid. Okay, in your classroom. And you remember, our students with disabilities have case managers, they have a classroom teacher, they have people that are really there to support them. You know, the whole idea that when a student qualifies for special education, they've gone through so many processes of testing and deciding this didn't work and this didn't work, and we tried this and we tried this. So now we're going to bring them into a self-contained or an inclusive environment, and we're going to support them better. And here's the documentation that you need. Because as a music educator, you have all the kids, or you have all the band kids, or all the orchestra kids, or all the choral kids. So you are coming at it looking at lots of documents. So you've got to have those files placed specifically for those classrooms when you need them. So that's a little backup on the law piece, because I wanted to make sure you realize that you are bound by those law documents that you sign. So let's talk a little bit about autism spectrum disorder. So autism, let's talk a little bit about autism. I began teaching, like I said, over 30 years ago, and the incidence of autism was 1 in 30 births. 1 in 10,000. 1 in 10,000 births. And now, 30 years later, I think the latest research says 1 in 70, 1 in 68. So the incidence of autism is much higher. Now, do we diagnose better than we ever have? Yes. Are we better at it? Do we early intervention? Yes, all of those things. We are much better at it than we've ever been. But there are more kids with autism than there've ever been. So let's look at the definition. Characterized by persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts, including deficits in social reciprocity, nonverbal communication behaviors used for social interaction, and skills in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. Okay, now that's a heavy hitter definition, but autism spectrum disorder has kind of evolved into that definition. It wasn't always that definition. We've kind of, as we learn, there used to be, we would draw this bubble, and autism was kind of pieces of this bubble, and you had to have more than one piece of the bubble to really have that diagnosis. And within that, we would have Asperger's syndrome, and we had pervasive developmental delay, and we had Rett syndrome. And now all of those are all together, and they've kind of pulled into what we call the autism spectrum, because there are so many levels of this. Kids high functioning with autism, and kids present lower functioning with autism, and all of it in between. And it's interesting that Casey chose this puzzle piece for the little graphic in our presentations of these 4 parts, is because our kids really are puzzle pieces. I mean, each one is their own little piece, and they're not anyone that's the same. So like we've said for years, if you've taught one child with autism, you've taught one child with autism. There's so many different ones. And what worked one day, that was great, but it might not work the next day. So we're constantly learning, which is days I go home and think, oh gosh, how could we have done that better for that kiddo? And some days I go home and go, that was great, that they did awesome, and look what they're learning. So I'm going to try to help you with some of that. I'm going to show you some things. I'm going to try to sing a few things. I am not at all going to give you everything you need. I know sometimes we feel like we're set up for some failure, and I'm going to try to set you up for some successes. So we're going to talk about some characteristics. So, I have some notes here in front of me, so you just bear with me as I read them. So under these areas, according to the DSM-5, now the DSM is a diagnostic manual of disabilities that a lot of the school psychologists use and psychiatrists use, where they do all this battery of testing, and through the testing and the scores get a diagnosis for a student or an adult. And so this is constantly being updated. There's probably the DSM-6 now, I believe. I think they've gone past the 5. But anyway, so the ISD have deficits in 2 domain areas. And so one is social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. So I'm going to give you some kind of examples of that, what that looks like, what that kind of present itself in their classroom. So loss of previously acquired speech, babbling, or social skills. Sometimes our kids with autism don't communicate as clearly as we would like. Delayed language development. They're not communicating as early as some other kiddos. Sometimes that's some of the beginning telltale signs of autism, because autism doesn't have anything that happens in utero that is obviously diagnosed. And we're still trying to figure out, there's some genetic links. Sometimes there's not, seems to be a genetic predisposition. I mean, they're still working so hard to figure out where and why there's more and more individuals with autism. But like we said, we are catching it sooner. But again, there's not that link in utero. So you could have a normal pregnancy, have a normal delivery, and think that all things are peachy and rosy. And then things could start changing up into even age 3 that you would not notice. And if you're a first time parent, maybe you wouldn't have these kids to compare to each other, and we know all of our kids are different, so you wouldn't be aware. So some of these things start to show up, and some of that is in language. A lot of times it's in language, delayed language. So a failure of normal back and forth conversations that you would see in a typical developing child, failure to imitate response to social interactions, avoidance of eye contact. And what we've learned a lot of that now is we used to work a lot on contact, but what we've learned now that because of the over working of their sensory input, that sometimes eye contact can be painful for kids with autism. And so we don't really push that as much as we used to. We used to really push a lot of looking while we were talking. And now there's some grace in that. So I let them look to the side because they could very well be listening to what I'm saying and not know, not looking at me, but understanding and it's processing. So that is also available, happens. A difficulty understanding body language with others. I don't really understand if you're angry, if your arms are crossed, or some facial expressions. I wouldn't get that. Sharing of interest and emotions. Again, that emotional exchange is different because autism is a processing delay and disorder, so that they are receiving what you're telling them, but they might not really be processing it as you have sent it. So again, it's so complicated to know what exactly. And we presume competence. We presume that they get it. That's what we should do. And then we work through what we're trying to communicate and how they're trying to communicate back. Lack of facial expressions and nonverbal communication, again, and difficulties in sharing imaginative play and making friends, because there's social issues in that, social communication and social interactions. And then the next part is restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities. Now some areas where that kind of shows up in the classroom looks like this. Persistent preferences for solitude, not really wanting to be around a big group of people. Persistent repetition of words or phrases can be very echolalic, so that if I would go, hello there, they would say, hello there. And then they would, like, I said, how are you? How are you? I'm fine. But they wouldn't necessarily be generating that really from emotional standpoint. They're generating it because they're just repeating what you're saying, very echolalic. And we want them to be able to share and to communicate like we're used to, or what is our norms, and that's something that there's some deficits. Resistance to minor changes in routines or surroundings. They don't do a change in a class organization quickly, and they wouldn't do a fire drill necessarily well, or any other kind of drill, or a change in their schedules. So we've got to set them up for success early in the day. If this is what their schedule looks like, they need visual schedules, and we'll talk a little bit about how important that is. Restricted interests, sometimes they're very narrow to what they love. I had a kid once that could tell me everything about butterflies, everything, to this fancy Latin name, but now had a hard time with his phone number or his address, but he was so specifically in tune with butterflies. It was amazing. Interest and intense reaction to sounds, smells, tastes, textures, lights, colors. And so I have for years, I'm sitting in my office at school now, and I have my overhead lights on. Normally I do nothing but lamp lighting. And that's what I do in the classroom, because there is a buzz, a natural buzz that goes on from those fluorescent lights that you might not be as aware of, but our students with autism would be very aware of. And it can be very frustrating for some, not all. Now remember, none of these are under all areas of autism. These are all some, partial, could be, characteristics of, might be. So just be aware that the things that we're talking about, you could think of one kid that is that way, but maybe the 3 others aren't. All right. So be aware of your lighting in your room. If you can go to lamp lighting and natural lighting, I highly recommend it. Now, our kids are visual learners and kinesthetic learners. So are many learners. So are many kiddos, typical and non-typical. But this piece is so very important. Visual support would help autistic children children with autism to process the information. They need as much visual support. I tell my students, my interns all the time, and my college kids, I wish it was just the song. I wish it was just me on my guitar. I wish it was just me and whatever so that they would do better. But that's not, they need all the visual support I can give them. I need graphic organization. They need to be able to see what I want them to do. They need to be able to see that visual schedule. They need to be able to know that I've finished one thing and started another. So very, 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 very visually dependent. Kinesthetic learners, the kids have got to have sensory breaks. And that's not natural. And I'm going to talk a lot of here and there about universal design for learning. This is a concept that we have in our textbooks, and the textbook that I'll mention a lot is this one. This is the book I use at Kennesaw State University. It's Music and Special Education. This is the third edition. It's by Mary Adamak and Alice Andero, two great music therapists who are also music educators who work at large universities, University of Iowa and University of Florida State University. And they have written this book and updated it 3 times because it's so valuable for music educators. They really put it in a way that you are learning about the disability and what does that mean in the music classroom? What does that mean in the music classroom? So highly, highly recommend that book. Some of the things about that book that I go back to a lot are the needs, as we know this, for sensory breaks. Kids need sensory breaks. They can't just sit and learn and learn and learn. They have to be able to get up and move a little bit. We know that for typical kids as well. So in this area, this sensory break is just this week, I have a kid that he's so fun and he's really struggles with the autism and especially communication. And he wants to do what's being presented, but he needs those breaks in the middle. So we would do an academic activity with music, and then we would get up and what helps him the most is jumping. He needs to jump. He needs to jump. And we were using something called, it's a TheraBand or a stretchy band, and it's for an individual. It's like this. It's not very big. And so it's just the one. And so we can like put his arms in it. We can put him in it. We can pull back and forth with it. I let him hold it. We take as many sensories and then we'll sing. We'll sing a little song. Stretch the band, stretch the band, stretch the band and stop. I mean, you name it, we've sung it. So that will help you as well. Sensory breaks, put them in your sessions, in your lessons as you design them. Universal design, all kids could benefit from sensory breaks. And the idea of the universal design for learning is that what do you do on the front end of setting up lessons and your room and what you want them to learn will help all the children, even though you might be doing that just for the special needs kiddo. But what you've done has helped all the kids in the room. It makes everything better. Okay, learning needs. The classroom environment should be structured. It's kind of what I just said. And that's not natural for every educator. Not every educator is crazy structured. But those who are, the kids with special needs, all of them, especially the kids with autism, will benefit so much more knowing that you have a certain structure and that when they come in their room, they sit in this one spot because this is their spot. This is where they always sit. And this person's on their right and this person's on their left and you're in front of them and there's a schedule of the day in front of them. Now that can be graphically presented on your big projectors on those interactive boards that we have now, or it could be good old school and just written, if it had to be, on a flip chart on your left or right where you just write it. And as you're done with the intervention, the activity, you mark it off because they need to visually see. And with some of my kids, because they are such full body kinesthetic learners, not only do they need to see you mark it off, they need to be able to, I have what we call all done sounds. So those kids that have so enjoyed that intervention, but they've got to put it away because you're done. They've got to be able to walk up, and at this one school, I've got a not a tone block. Tempo block. I'll get it out right in a minute. So they have a tempo block and they come up and they walk to the board and they click it because I've got it, or they push it to the trash because it's an interactive board. They pull it over, they physically touch it, and then they play the tempo block. Dun, 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 dun. And that helps them. Okay, that activity is done. I'm moving on to the next one. So I've done their visual support and their kinesthetic support. Provide consistency and predictability throughout the class. Again, they just got to know what's next. Surprising is not a good idea for kids with autism. Now, provide consistency and predictability when providing information to students with autism. Present it visually and verbally so that students will easily attain successful learning. They've got to see it. They've got to hear it. They've got to know that they've actually got to touch it if they can. That's why I'm like, I used to old school it where they would go pull the title off of the board. Now we don't do that as much. And now because of our world of COVID, which we're all working in right now, we don't touch as many things as we used to. Implement strategies and the interventions to increase desired behaviors and decrease undesired behaviors, which we all know there are undesired behaviors. Now, that might include, what are some of those undesired behaviors? We know that we don't want kicking and screaming and running and all of those things. We don't want of those things. So we're going to reinforce that which is good and get rid of that which doesn't work. So we're going to set the kids up for success. And by setting those kids up for success, that sets all the kids up for success. All right. So success in music, what does that look like? Wow. Share musical experiences. Yes, they need to share musical experiences. How do you do that? Well, just this week, I have a contra slit drum, and it is a 4-foot by 7-foot contra drum. It's a 50-pound drum. You can't tote it around. I don't pull it out every day, but when I have a small little group, they sit on the drum and they shared this call and response. And this kid who has so little response reactions with a friend was really enjoying himself. So create those opportunities, especially when it gets safer. Rhythmic songs, action songs, or simple songs. Yes, all of that. We've got to make them simple. We've got to attach the lyrics to an icons of the pictures to what's going on so they understand it. They've got to be able to understand it. Pair expressive language with the elements in music, such as rhythm or melody. How can they use a song to get to their ability to sing it? So like if we were going to do John the Rabbit. Oh, John the Rabbit, oh yes, had a mighty bad habit, oh yes, of going to my garden, oh yes. Well, the part that keeps coming back, the expressive language. Remember, receptive is how they receive what you've sung. Expressive is how they're going to tell you back, okay? So I've got and you've all got them. Hang on, I'm looking for it in my room right here. Here it is. These all dollar mics, 99. So I would sing, they have to be able to get it out. Oh, John the Rabbit. And they would say, oh, yes. Now, you can clean this up quickly. And maybe you just have it for that kiddo in your room. Maybe that's when he's got his mic. And when I have the virtually as well, I do this. Oh, yes. And I would put it up to the camera because you tell me all of a sudden that kid at home can sing because he thinks that's my cue. That's what Miss Amber always does when it's my turn. So use those echo mics. They're so important. Also, when we talk about visuals, they've got to visually see it. So, I always say that so much of working at home and virtually for our kiddos comes back to this part. So I don't have it all with me. So if I were going to talk about doing dance party, or if I were going to talk about, okay, everybody take a deep breath. So I'm going to show them visually on these as well. So I had to go a little old school. Also, whenever the kids did a great job, I want to throw them a kiss, but I can't really throw them a kiss. So I'm going to do this, mwah, and I'm going to give it to them that way. Also, when I'm looking for kids that are doing a great job, now remember, I'm setting this room up so everybody in the room is going to do great. I'm going to pull out my telescope. Oh, and now I'm going to look at the children. Now, this is really a telescope, and you really can see people. Now, I do this in my classroom. I do this virtually as well, so that they can see that I'm looking for them and I'm saying their name. So I'm visually showing them that. Now, also, kids with autism, when I talk about needing sensory breaks, sometimes in your classroom, you just need literally a sensory bag. Things that that you can go back and pick up. Things like, so maybe Johnny might need just one of these. Now, the hard part about this is sometimes they start chunking them around the room. But if they know they need it, maybe they'll just do this. Also, don't be afraid of fidgets. If they need a fidget, give them a fidget. This will make your life better. You can continue to teach your lessons and give them something to do because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for some sensory input. Now, in this bag, I've got all kinds of things. I've got good old-fashioned little massagers. Sometimes that just, these are the dollar store. That just on their knees. They themselves can do it. Or an assistant who's there with them. Sometimes they just come in with their own little bag. But if you have a bag that they only get these when they come to music, that makes them able to listen a little better while someone else is helping them with their sensory input. Other things I have in here, like these great squeezy balls, so that they can just really get going at it. Other things that you might want to have in your arsenal of stuff for kids with autism in your classroom is you might also want to have some weighted toys. Now, This is called Lucy the lap dog. Isn't she super cute? She's just a big old stuffed animal. But inside of her, there is, now this is what's crazy. There are rice bags. And the rice bags inside of her, this dog right here weighs about 20 pounds. She's about 20, maybe she's more like 15 pounds, but she's pretty darn heavy. And you know why? Because when I know the kids need it, I put them in their lap. Like little kindergartners, I was just using it this, well, it's just the little one's a preschooler, but this little one was jumping everywhere. I put them in a chair that was a little larger so their feet didn't touch the ground. I let their feet just dangle because they needed the sensory. And I put Lucy the lap dog in their lap. Now, you can Google that, Lucy the lap dog, and you can, there's a lady in the state that makes her, and she's so worth it, and she's heavy. Now, here's the hard part. You got a big old classroom of kids, they all want Lucy. But Lucy will lose her, everybody's new wears off. Eventually they'll realize that Lucy's just for Johnny or Lucy's just for Susan. But that kind of sensory, so in a chair that's a little taller, and then the Lucy in the lap, and they're swinging, and then all of a sudden it feels they're getting some comfort, so now they can focus. So they need that sensory input. So that will help them so much. So you need something weighted. A weighted toy is always good. A bag of sensory items that could be used. That kid could do themselves, or maybe the assistant in the room can help you with if you have such a thing. If you have online kids, using these types of things so that you can show it to them when you're talking, because the visual is so important. Giving them all kinds of, yeah, you did good. And here's another thing that's so helpful, is that they need, I keep this on a ring. See, we wear this. This is good old fashioned. And these are communication cards so that when I need the kid and I don't want to say his name quickly, or the assistants have these, and I'm like, okay. And the kid all of a sudden sits. Now, granted, he's not sitting in a desk in my room, but that's what this one has. That one room he was that I had this for. And then he's doing something he shouldn't, and I show him this. Now, there's a ton of them. And you notice I have these like little markers, so that tells me where they are. Quiet. So, and these are on my neck so that I don't have to actually say something to the kid. I can quickly just show him what I want him to show while I keep teaching. Okay. So again, these are called communication cards. Google that as well, and you can find them and print them up. I think Teachers Pay Teachers has those as well. And I just put them on a lanyard so that I have them on my neck when I need them. Another wonderful thing with a kiddo who needs some sensory time, but maybe he gets so built up in his sensory time that he's not paying attention anymore, that he's playing with the toys more than he's watching. Then you put him on a visual timer. This is a great little visual timer. Look at that. You turn it over and guess what? Off it goes. Can you tell what's happening there? So then you just need to Google visual timers, and these are cheap, and then you just have them. So once you set the timer, and when all of this gets all down here, he's got to stop, and he will, because he sees it's coming to an end. So those are very important. Also, our kiddos have the communication, because autism is a communication disorder. So they have a hard time going back and forth. So they might come into your room with these large devices that are like augmentative communication devices. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when I get to the next disability, but kids with autism have those as well. And we have low-tech devices like picture exchange communication, a PICS, or we have high-tech Dynavoxes where they come in with full-blown boards that they're talking to you with. And, you can also use your own things with your iPads. And we'll talk more about that when we get to different disabilities. Sorry, I'm just going all over the place with you. I've got so many things to teach you. So let's talk about paired expressive language. We did that. Improvisation of expressions. Allow them to do the improvisation. It's so important. Vocal improv. Just yesterday, I was pulling out a slide whistle, and I was trying to get the kids just to emulate the sound, because so many of our kids are nonverbal and they're not talking to me, but I know they're in there. So I've got that slide whistle. Ooh, and now they're kind of and I have them like, now, granted, this was before COVID. This kid, I wasn't having him touch this, but just touching and watching that sound, listening and seeing that whistle come out and come back in. It was fascinating for the kid. The kid was so on target. And everyone else in the room was doing the vocal piece, and he was just watching the slide whistle because that was fascinating to him. Now, vocal warm-up, music and movement. Use recorded music, because remember, not that your singing isn't predictable, but recorded music is predictable because it's a song that will always be that way when you press play. So if you have a song of the month, I highly recommend a song of the month, a dance of the month, so that every time they come into your room, they're like, oh, I got this. Yeah, I can do this. I can do this. It's just very different if you change it up all the time, because it takes how many times for a kid to hear something before it goes into long-term memory, and how many times does a kid need to hear it before it goes into some comfort, so that it's reliability because they've heard it so much. And as music educators, and we know this, we have heard a song so many times that we're kind of sick of it. And kids with disabilities need to hear it so many more times before it becomes comfort and grounding and core to what they need to get into class and do well. Which is kind of why we start in music therapy anyway, everything with our hello songs. Now, the hello songs could change throughout the year, or they couldn't, or they could change according to who's in front of them. Like there could be like the Miss Amber hello or the intern hello. But the hello is a grounding thing. And if we talk about the weather, it's grounding because the weather can change, but that's the same weather song. And we talk about the day of the week. Now that can change, but it's grounding. The kids kind of start to center. So once again, it's got this structure in the setting that makes the kid go, okay, I can handle this. Now, all of this structure is going to help all of the gen ed kids in that room as well. This is just things, these are, once again, universal design. What did I set up at this level that will help at this level? So all of those things, highly important. Group and individual improv, pair adequately, pair appropriately. You know who's going to help one another and who's not so helpful. I wish all kids were kind and generous, but we know our kids. So singing social stories, Google social stories, because social stories are so helpful for our kids with autism who don't understand social skills and social interactions, that having a social story activity in a music intervention is kind of fun for all the kids, but really good for the kid who needs it. Body part songs, yes, we know we all need those, but those kids need them because they need to remember, like if you said, touch your nose, well, we'll be behind a mask now. Touch your head or whatever. Those things that imitation. Imitation is hard, and we work a lot on that, which is why I do a lot of signing with kids with autism. I explain that a lot because, autism is a communication disorder, it's a processing disorder. So I need to get any way for this kid to communicate with me. So if he doesn't have a device and he's not using his voice, but he has full use of his motor skills, then I'm going to teach him all the signing so that he knows that if he says this, he needs help. Or if he does this, he wants to stop. Or if he does this, he needs to sit. So or yes, or no, or whatever he has learned so that he can communicate that way. So we do a lot of signing. So don't be afraid of that. When we get to the HI part, we'll talk a little more about signing. Songs for identifying musical instruments, objects, attributes, shapes, colors. Yes, you can use music to cross all the curricular needs. It crosses into math and science and social studies. As a music therapist, I use music to teach all those kinds of skills. And then at the end of the day, I'm also teaching music education to these kids with disabilities. So I've got to make sure that I'm aligning the skill sets when I need them. So that if I'm talking about the artist of the week, because we've got older functioning kids, we've got middle school or high school kids, but they have disabilities, and we're doing a whole genre of these different artists, and we're going to talk about when they were born and when they passed away. Then we're going to do a math project. We're going to do a little math equation on how old was they when they passed away. That's huge. And then we're going to talk about, well, where were they born? Then we're going to go pull out the map, and we're going to go find it on the map, because all kids need a little more geography. All kids are kind of struggling with geography. So we're going to go back and find it. We're going to go back. So I'm going to cross over with social studies and geography. I'm going to cross over with math and figure out how old this kid is. And then I'm going to actually give them 6 points about the artist that I'm going to come back and ask them after we've looked at the video of the artist in action. And then I'm going to be like, okay, so what instruments did you see in that video production? Oh yeah, that was a guitar. You think it was an electric guitar and acoustic? But I'm taking everything down to very minute, and I'm going to ask them these questions after I have given them opportunities to see it visually and to hear it auditorily, and we can move to it as we go as well. So many layers that will make successes for our kids with disabilities. And the gen ed kids, everything you set up for these kids are going to help all the kids in the room. If you don't get anything else out of these seminars, that's going to be so helpful. List song titles to cross out when you're completed. I've done this for years, where I actually, in our visual schedule, I specifically write up hello song, or the next thing would be our song of the month. And let's say it's called motivation. And so motivation is up there. And then I might, beside it goes song of the month. And they'll learn that that's the one that we're going to sing every time they come in. And that's the one that they're going to learn. And then when we're done with it, we either check it off, we mark it off, we whatever, put it in the trash if it's interactive, so that they see that that's done. And then the structure of your musical experiences. Okay, that was a lot of information on autism, and I know that. But they're as I would call a heavy hitter. It's not a matter of if you have a child with autism in your classroom, it's when. You will all have kids with autism in your classroom. It's just part of our world. Kids with autism and, all functioning levels with all kinds of abilities that they will be able to totally impress you in the things that they can do. Let's talk a little bit about secondary. The same in secondary. I know students with autism who choose to sign up for band orchestra course in middle school and then do great and soar through high school and are a part of band programs and marching bands and orchestras and chorus and show choirs, but yet they will always have autism. So they are going to figure out strategies to help them succeed. And you, as their educator, are going to have to figure out as well strategies to help them succeed. So never underestimate the musical abilities of students with autism. Don't assume. Now, as we all know, general music, not equally offered throughout the state of Georgia, but opportunities are there that our kids do better because we can mainstream a younger age easier. We can include easier at the younger age in some respects. But when these kids get to middle school, their opportunities kind of slow down. They may not have the opportunities to be in the performing organization. So when given the opportunities as in the secondary world to have the kids in their self-contained classes or to support these kids better so that they do better. And I could do a whole nother seminar on secondary, but I'll hit that as we go along the way. Okay, so that's a little bit about autism. Now let's go to intellectual disabilities. Now this is all about IQ and the ability to do things up according to what your IQ levels are. Now, there are individuals with multiple disabilities. Like you can have a disability, you could have an intellectual disability and have autism, or vice versa. You can have autism with an intellectual disability. But don't assume that a kid with autism has a low IQ, because that could be far from the right thing. Now, let's read this definition. Significantly sub-average general individual functioning existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior and manifested during the developmental period that adversely affects a child's educational performance. Okay, so let's think about that. Adversely affects the child's educational performance. Now, if an average IQ is 100, so I would hope everybody that's watching, you're average or above average. You're all music educators. So you're going to you got this. I know there's always giftings and we all have our giftings. And I would say that I watched a TED Talk once because it just intrigued me. The title was like the one thing that determines success as a young adult or as a child or as a whatever. And I was like, well, what is the one thing? So when you watch that TED Talk, you have to get through a little bit of it. And finally at the end, she says, grit. Grit determines. And I'm like, wow, don't you wish you could teach grit? And that's what they were talking about. Like teaching drive and motivation, if we could ever figure that out. Because we all know there are some kids with high IQs that are like brilliant, genius, but are at home in mom and dad's house in the basement playing video games all the time. And they're not using those giftings because they have no motivation. They have no grit. They have no drive. And then there are those who have an average IQ who work so hard and have such drive and such grit, and they're succeeding like crazy. And then we have those with lower IQs because of all kinds of things. Now, why is it that kids are born with intellectual disabilities? I don't know. There are chromosomal issues. There are things that happen in utero. There are things that happen during the birth process. There are things that happen post. You can acquire an intellectual disability really anytime, anyway, any part of the lifespan, from in utero to the very end of life, because it's all part of a brain dysfunction, a chromosomal issue. A traumatic brain injury could result in being intellectually disabled. So you could have been totally fine, and due to a horrible accident, your intellectual functioning is now lessened. Or you could have a chromosomal issue in utero, you could have Down syndrome. And so you're born with an intellectual disability because Down syndrome qualifies under an intellectual disability. So there are lots of different things in this in the chapters in these book about what qualifies. Where does learning disabilities qualify? Now, it might be in this chapter, and we're still trying to figure out learning disabilities again, because it's like the practice of medicine. That's kind of what learning disabilities become. They're like, well, it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, because of all this testing that school psychologists do. That they kind of narrow in on what is it that's going on with this kiddo, and so they'll decide, well, it's this because of the IQ, or it's this because of the testing, or it's a process to figure out what the kids need. So an intellectual disability means that there is a IQ that's below what is normally functioning. So if 100 is normal and 120 is genius, so 120 and above is a rock star, and maybe, but below 100, 90, you're still functioning adult, you're doing a good job, you could have all kinds of grit and have a 95, 90, 85, whatever, and be doing great and having a wonderful life. But you get to the point of a 70 and to 55, and that's when you qualify for what they call a mild intellectual disability. So I teach kids at one of my schools around the corner, and they're called MIMO kids. It's the kind of name of the class. So they have mild to moderate intellectual disabilities. So they're ranging from 70 to 55. And since they're moderate as well, they range even into the 40s. So that's a really low. So what they can do, so it's not only their IQ is low, but their adaptive behaviors. And adaptive behaviors are things like how they're taking care of themselves, their functional skills, their self-determination, their reasoning abilities, their decision-making models. Those are all kind of adversely affected because of what's going on either chromosomally, which affected the IQ, or other issues, brain injuries, things. And then you go down to 40 to 25 to 40 is a severe, and then below 25 is profound. And those are some pretty low functioning kiddos with littles that they can do in contributing to their self-care and like they would not live by themselves. They would always need some kind of care. So that's a little bit about a definition of intellectual disabilities. I'm realizing I didn't move my circle. I'm so sorry. No, my circle is better. It's over here. All right. So now you can see all that. Let's keep going. Now, intellectual disabilities, characteristics. So children with different severities of ID. So remember, you've got 70 who are mildly intellectually disabled to below 25, which are profoundly, that will need care the rest of their lives. So what are some characteristics and some warning signs? Now, most intellectual disabilities that happen in utero and at birth, parents are aware, like through chromosomal testing that there's an issue, or that there was trauma at birth and there could be an issue. So cerebral palsy happens, a lesion to the brain. There are things, I could spend hours just talking about that, but I'm trying to get us back to some characteristics. So sit up, crawl, or walk later than other kids. These are these things that you would see. They talk later and have trouble speaking in general, find it hard to remember things and recall information. They wouldn't be able to go buy anything because they would have a hard time managing money. Social rules wouldn't always make a lot of sense because they don't really understand all of them. Have trouble seeing the consequences of their actions because they don't really see that their actions are wrong in any way sometimes. Trouble solving problems, thinking logically, because again, their IQ level they're struggling to really grasp the concepts that we're teaching them. So learning styles, again, the same with autism, visual and kinesthetic. Once again, I wish the music alone could teach the kiddos, but there's so much more. They've got to see it. And in this world, more than ever, I believe that my ID kids are all sensory. I've got to see it, smell it, taste it if you can, involve yourself, move to it. You've got to hear it. It's all of it. I have to take my interventions all the way down to those 5 senses. And how can I teach them in a way that I have tapped as many of the senses as possible? Kinesthetically, oh gosh, they have to move. We all got to move. There's a reason why we're all kind of kinesthetic. Remember, I don't know if I said it this time or not, but a federal mandate is PE. They decided that many, many years ago. If they don't get art and music, they're going to get PE because that's a federal mandate, because we've got to move our bodies. We've got to take care of our bodies. You got one of them, you got to figure out how to take care of it. Okay, so learning needs. You have to make accommodations appropriately to students. So by providing supplementary aids and services, and all of this is going to come to you in that IEP, and those adaptation forms are going to tell you what they're going to need. And then you need to have those conversations with the IEP team. It's like, are these kids in my room so that they're getting a grade in music? Are they here for social reasons? Because again, look at at that IQ level. If you've got a severe, profound child, I'm not sure cognitively it's appropriate that I'm trying to teach them about quarter notes and eighth notes. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't expose and enrich their life with music. Every child deserves a music education. Every child deserves access to music and involvement in music and the creation of music. But then again, am I grading them on chordal progressions? Is that appropriate? That's a conversation that needs to be had. And when given the opportunity to serve these kids when they are in a self-contained classroom, if that's an option for you. Sorry, I'm going to take a little sip of my tea because I'm talking nonstop. If it's an option for you to have these kids self-contained and not in a included into a gen classroom, I would highly recommend and have those conversations. Now, some kids mainstream beautifully or included beautifully into general education and into our general music classrooms, but other kids might really benefit from an adapted music class. Now, let's talk about adapted music a little bit. Are you qualified to be an adapted music educator? If you have a degree in music education, which you all will who are watching this, yes, that makes you qualified. That's a little crazy, isn't it? I say that all the time in class at KSU. I'm like, after taking this one class and graduating with a degree in music, you too are highly qualified to be an adapted music teacher. You're laughing at this moment because you're like, oh my gosh, I do not feel qualified. Well, remember what I said early on. There are days after 2 degrees and 30 years that I don't feel qualified working in special ed. So it's taxing, it's testing, you learn as you go for sure. Every day's a new day. Got to keep a sense of humor. Got to keep smiling. Got to think hard about it. Got to plan extra so that you can start fresh and new. So let's keep going. Sorry, I digress because I get in my soapboxes. And while I'm on my soapbox, let me go back and say this. Your job as a music educator is to really develop lifelong lovers of music. Lifelong lovers of music. If you get a music educator in the middle of that, some kid that you taught through the years as a high school director decides they want to be a band director or whatever, music educator, and then you're like, bonus. And sometimes that difference in that kid's life was made in general music in elementary school, maybe in middle school with a choral director, maybe in high school with an orchestra director. But at some point that spark was there and they so loved it that they thought, I want to do this for the rest of my life. Well, we know that music brings sparks to all kids. I mean, I think everybody loves at some level of music. Now, my mother, she is tone deaf, but she loves music. She'll listen all day and make a joyful noise, but she's not making a pretty noise, but it's a joyful noise. But she loves music. So I believe, music was given to us as a gift, and it's our job to share it and teach it and explore it with all kids, no matter what their level of functioning. So don't let that stop you. All right. Need help in communicating with others. So they're going to need those devices. I highly recommend if you have iPads in your classrooms to make sure that you have looked at a program called Talkboard. It's a great app that has, I think if it's not free, it's cheap. And it has the ability to build these communication boards you can build it just for music so that you could put instruments on there for selection or yes, no questions or easy interactions with you so you can have that interaction with the kid in your room. Some of these kids are going to come in your rooms with these devices already. I also highly recommend some low tech. This is called a step-by-step. So that you can record quickly on this. If I were to sing back and forth, and I just already programmed it, but it's quick and easy. If I were to say, hello there, how are you? It's so good to see you. I think I did that part on here. But you just press a button and you record and it goes on a loop and it has several minutes of a loop. I think you can go up to 15 minutes so that you really can have an interaction back and forth with a kid, even just yes, no's. Yesterday, my interns were working with a kid with Down syndrome in a MIMO classroom, and they were trying to have him answer the question of the day. But really, it wasn't even answer the question of the day. It was asking the question of the day to another friend. Well, he's pretty nonverbal, but we put the question on there. So if I would say, I'm going to show you how easy this is because it is very easy. I'm pressing the record button and I'll say, what is the weather like today? Okay, if that's my question and I want him to ask that, so I have him press the button. Can you hear that? Let me turn up the volume a little bit. What is the weather like today? See how nice and easy that is? Okay, so easy to program, that easy. And that's low tech. It's called a step-by-step. And you look, and the company that makes it is AbleNet. It's so easy, and they're like $80 or less probably by now. Okay, keep going. Find out student strengths and create opportunities for success. Yes. Be as concrete as possible. Yes. Yesterday, same class. No, older class, MIMO class. Lots of kids with Down syndrome in this class. And my intern's trying to teach them in their musicality block. They were trying to learn the eighth notes within a song. And so she had all it graphically represented, but she was putting it on the body. And it wasn't a fast tempo, but she did 4/8 on the knees, 4/8 in the hands, 4/8 in the shoulders, 4/8 on the head, and she ended with snaps. Well, first of all, that was a lot. And I said, you got to break it way down. Let's just start with eighth notes on the knees. And let's just do that for a couple of bars. And then so you got to go take it down a step, take it way down. Demonstrate the instructions as modeled rather than only verbal. You got to do it with them. You got to show them what you want, then ask them to do it. Don't give those instruments out till you have shown them on your instrument what you want them to do, because they don't have the gen ed doesn't either, but that self-control, that on-task behavior, that impulse control, they got to be wait. I always sing that little song, instruments on the floor, but wait, don't touch. Well, that's hard. It's hard, especially hard with 25 kids in a room. So show them first. Then when you're ready for them to do it, pass it out. You know that, but that's a little tidbit. Provide students with hands-on materials with visual supports. Yes. Break the new task into small steps, like I was talking about. The reason why she was doing eighth notes, because last month we did quarter notes, and the month before that we did half notes, and the month before that we did whole notes. So they did whole notes for a month, half notes for a month, quarter notes for a month, and eighth notes for a month. Now remember, this is a self-contained class. This is not with gen ed. Again, which is why I highly recommend, if you can do some adapted music classes, do them. If you've got the time on your schedule, do it. If you're on a 9-day rotation with not even enough time to barely go to have lunch, then it's not something that's going to be usable for you. So you've got to be able to break the steps down in your classroom and have them broken up in parts, and making sure that the kids that need that support are in that small group. And the kids that don't need the support are working on a different task. It's you being better at your planning that makes the kids with special needs really succeed in your classroom. Have students do the task only one step at a time. Provide multiple opportunities to try out and assist when needed. And give students immediate feedback. And the feedback needs to be specific by saying, Johnny, you did a great job with that. I love how you just played your tambourine perfectly. I was specific. Instead of saying, great job, everybody, which I do all the time. And I have to make myself stop and say, great job, Johnny, playing that tambourine. Great job, Susan, playing that drum on the steady beat. You have to be specific about who it is you're talking to and what it is they did. And let the kids participate in group activities. The inclusive model in the elementary schools is really creating generations of kids who are accepting of their peers with differences. They so much more than my generation and even the generations past mine, when, I didn't even really remember going to school with kids with disabilities. I grew up in South Georgia. I'm a Georgia girl. All of my work has been in the state of Georgia. I know what it's like to be in the rural areas. That's where I lived. That's where I grew up. And I didn't have any big music education until I got to middle school, and the only opportunity I had was band. So that's what I chose, because that's what I did. So I understand when you don't have a lot of that according to where you are coming from watching all of this. But what we're really building with our gen ed kids now, really communicating and aligning with special needs kids, and really the sweetness it takes for them to understand and show that kind of support and kindness and helping them succeed. Successes in music for intellectual disabled kiddos. Use music and rhythmic movements to develop gross motor skills. We know that. Respiration patterns and muscular relaxation. Remember that some of our kids also have some physical issues. We'll talk about that when we get to orthopedic impairments. So be aware when they've tired. I haven't even said this, but a lot of our Down syndrome kiddos land in the intellectually ID groups. And so a lot of, I've got a class that I teach that over yesterday, and they all have Down syndrome. It's a whole little Down syndrome class. I love them, but I also know that they tire quickly, so that when I've got them up and moving, I can't move 3 songs in a row. I got to move, and then I got to sit, and I got to let them calm down, take a deep breath. If they need to get their water, it's just be aware of that. But they need all of this, so don't not do it. Just do it in moderation. Musical cueing to improve word recognition. Let the anticipation of a song allow them to sing the end of the phrase. If you were going twinkle, twinkle, little, the kid's going to say, star, how I wonder what you the kid will say it. All right. Pair reading materials with song. Yes, yes, yes. Put the print on the board. If you're going to teach a song, put the print up, even if it's just the chorus. You never, 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 never know. It's going to help every kid in the room, universal design, and it's going to really help the kid who needs it. Okay. A class on Monday, this intern was singing her hello song. It was a kind of a cool hip hello. This was a fourth and fifth grade. Actually, they're all fourth grade. These are kids with autism with some interfering behaviors. And this one kid would get so mad because of the mask and singing with a mask, didn't understand what she was saying. And so I had said the week before, I'm like, you got to put the words to that song up. He wants to understand, but he doesn't, there's all kinds of barriers to success. Those words went up and he saw them and he sang that hello song with her. It literally almost brought her to tears, and me, because he wasn't a kid that sings a whole lot, but he wanted it, but he couldn't do it without the words. So put the words up. Musical presentation of new vocabularies to increase the number of words. Yes, like again, all songs create new word opportunities. The word walls for the kids. Don't ever underestimate what you can teach in music. And percussive instrument playing. Yes, let them play, play, play. I could go on and on and on. It's been exactly 1 hour that I've been gabbing with all of y'all. I hope you've learned something. This is the end of part 1, and then we'll start with part 2 for 2 other disability areas. I hope you'll come back. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching part 1 of this 4-part webinar series on teaching exceptional children in the music classroom. Before we close, I want to thank Amber for her wealth of knowledge and expertise on this topic and her willingness to share it with others. Our hopes are that you learn something, take some time to reflect on it, and begin to use the information and instructional strategies discussed in this webinar to inform your own teaching practice and support your efforts to reach and teach all students, including those with special needs, in your own music classrooms. Here is my contact information as well as Amber's contact information if you would like to discuss this further or have any additional questions. We'd love to chat. I would ask that if you have a moment to please fill out our brief feedback survey using a QR code reader or type the URL in your browser. One of our goals at the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts team is to provide relevant and informative, content-specific professional development for fine arts teachers across the state. So any feedback you could provide us would be greatly appreciated and highly beneficial so that we can provide you with the best professional development opportunities as possible. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you all have a great day.